a physical, literal Jesus told Thomas to touch his hands, touch his feet, place his hand in his side. It was a bodily, physical Jesus that spoke to Thomas. The tomb was examined by friend and enemy alike. And even though the grave clothes were still there in the position of a dead body, undisturbed, there was no body found in the grave. The tomb was empty. Subsequently, many scientific studies have been done in that tomb, and each of them has validated that no human body ever decomposed in the tomb of the Lord Jesus. In our text in Acts chapter 1, he was seen by over 500 eyewitnesses, which said they heard him speak, they saw him eat, they felt his touch, they saw him ascend. At the ascension, the angel said, "This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven." It was a literal Jesus that rose. It was a literal Jesus that ascended. And it is a literal Jesus that's coming again one day. I want you to think of this too. Those disciples, after the resurrection, were filled with such fear, filled with defeat, filled with discouragement. Maybe we could even say despair. They were hiding from the Roman soldiers for fear that now that Jesus was dead, the soldiers would come after them. Because after all, they had publicly identified themselves with him, had publicly walked with him, had publicly aided him and assisted him for nearly 4 years. And now we find them hiding behind locked doors for fear of the Roman soldiers. And yet, just a few days after that, you find Simon Peter on that day of Pentecost standing in front of thousands, proclaiming that without Christ there was no salvation, with boldness and with courage. The rest of the disciples took that message of Jesus' death and resurrection into the known world, into all parts of the known world. And every single one of them met violent deaths. Every single one of them faced the wrath of people who refused to listen to that message, that Jesus had died and had risen from the dead. Some of them were sawn in two. Some of them were hacked with the sword. Some of them were run through with the spear. Some of them, like Bartholomew, were skinned alive. Some of them were fed to wild animals. Some of them were clubbed to death. Some of them were stoned to death. And yet every single one of them went to their deaths proclaiming Jesus rose from the dead. Now, ladies and gentlemen, men will not die for a lie. They will not do it. They will not die for something they know is a lie. These men believed they had seen a resurrected Jesus Christ. They believed that he was dead and he was alive forevermore, and they went to their deaths proclaiming that message. Something else about his resurrection. It was a unique resurrection. There had been resurrections before. The widow's son in 1 Kings chapter 17. The Shunammite son in 2 Kings chapter 4. Jairus' daughter. The young man in Nain. Lazarus. Tabitha. Eutychus. As Jesus died, the saints of many rose from their graves around Jerusalem. But while all these had a literal physical resurrection, each also died a second time. And those bodies remained in the grave even until this very day. Jesus' resurrection is unique in that he arose, first of all, with his own power. He said, I have power to lay it down. I have power to raise it again. Now, there's not a person in the room that has the power to do that. You don't have that power. I don't have that power. You cannot will yourself to death. You cannot will yourself to life after having died. Jesus gave his Spirit in death. He gave it. And he took his Spirit again in resurrection. Of his own will, he did this. Not only that, once risen, he would never die again. He said, I am he that was alive and was dead, and now am alive forevermore. There'll be no more death for Jesus. His resurrection is unique. His resurrection has credibility. For every effect there is a cause. Think about it. The empty tomb, the Lord's Day. What would cause these Jewish believers to begin worshiping on the Lord's Day as they did? And for these now over 2,000 years continue to worship a risen Christ on that first day of the week that we know as the Lord's Day. What would cause them to do this? Believers on this first day of the week, we meet to celebrate the resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. That Sabbath day was for the purpose of resting, to celebrate the act of creation, that 6-day week of creation that God created the heaven and the earth and everything that is therein. And on the 7th day he rested. For all of those many centuries, Jewish believers rested on that Sabbath day to commemorate and to celebrate creation. But we're not here on the first day of the week celebrating creation. We are here on the first day of the week celebrating resurrection. The Creator became flesh and died on a cross, was buried, and on the third day, the first day of the week, rose again from the dead. And that's why believers throughout the world and throughout the centuries, for the most part, have gathered on that first day of the week in commemoration of resurrection. Think about the advent of the Christian church. Where did the church come from? There was no church until after Jesus had risen from the dead. There was no institution that was known as the church. It was unknown. It was not conceived in the imagination of men. The disciples themselves had no thought or forethought of this institution that we call the church. What created the church? What happened that caused the church to come into existence? It was the resurrection of Jesus Christ that brought the church into existence.